La 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 la. Emily, 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 and I won't have a bad word said about her. And, you know, we stan a self-sufficient queen. I'd certainly have issues with her if she was my mother as well. Toxic masculinity. Rory is a terrible friend to Lane. He's got a $3 million trust fund and she's a bit of a mess, let's be honest. Hello Donna Reid episode. She could learn something from reading it. Tell me I'm wrong, I'll wait. He just reeks of privileged male entitlement. Lorelei's me ride or die. He's got money, being bratty and entitled.
If you're out on the road.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you there. I was just reading the abridged journals of Sylvia Plath, since Miss Rory Gilmore also was seen reading it. Hi, I'm Ray. Welcome back to another video, or welcome if you're here for the first time. I'll just have a sip of me coffee. It's illegal to not have coffee whilst talking about Gilmore Girls. Look at me cup. It says I drink as much coffee as the Gilmore Girls. True. Not Luke's, but it'll do. So, here we are for another video, and as a Gilmore Girls stan, a fan, it's my comfort show. I thought, why not do a video where I'm recommending books for each character of the main characters on the hit TV show Gilmore Girls. So I'm gonna give a book or two suggestions for each of the main characters. I'm not gonna go into the secondary characters, it's just gonna be the main cast. So we're talking the Gilmores, the love interests for Rory, the friends, and then a couple that I personally like and think are iconic, so they're getting a book suggestion as well. Side note, don't be getting offended if I say I don't like a character, Logan, Dean, Christopher. It's a TV show. They're my opinions.
That's my opinion!
And you don't have to have the same opinion, but I've tried to give book suggestions that I think the character would like, or it's kind of in keeping what we've seen them read in the series. So, first off, we're going to start with the one, the only, Rory Gilmore. She's a character, obviously. We love her in the first few seasons. Let's not mention season 4. After season 4, when she gets the bob and she starts being bratty and entitled, I struggle to watch Lorelei's me ride or die. We're starting with Rory because she's probably, would we say, she's one of the main ones anyway. So we're starting with Rory, and she's the most bookish, so we're going with her. We see Rory reading various books throughout the season, so you know she's already well read. But one book that's very popular that we see her reading is the unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath, which I have here. So I thought, you know, she's obviously a fan of Sylvia Plath. We see her mention in the bell jar. So I thought, in keeping with her interest and admiration of Miss Sylvia Plath, why not give her an autobiography of Sylvia Plath? And that is Red Comet by Heather Clark. And I've seen a lot of people saying this is a really well done and intricate autobiography on Sylvia Plath, and it highlights her achievements as a female writer and poet and delves into the truths and the myths of her life. And we see Rory reading a lot of Sylvia Plath, as I mentioned, and I can imagine Rory going out and buying this book. So that's my first recommendation for Rory. The next book that I suggest for Rory, and this is more so for the later seasons of Rory, as I said, she becomes rather entitled and bratty.
He's not a married guy. He's Dean, my Dean.
In season 4 onwards. In the later seasons as well, we see Rory being entitled and not acknowledging the privilege that she has, because she leans into that privilege a lot, and she obviously gets a taste for the nicer, finer things in life, but she will never acknowledge that she herself is privileged. So a book that I think would be good for her, that highlights division and privilege in more millennial modern women, is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. I can imagine Rory reading this, but also I think she could learn something from reading it, because it's a contemporary novel about privilege and race and entitlement. And it also highlights the anxieties and the lack of stability of 20-somethings in the modern day age. And in the Year in the Life reboot, we see that Rory, you know, she is in a sense of anxiety and she doesn't have stability in a career, and she's a bit of a mess, let's be honest.
So excited because I love
miss.
And I think she would probably see herself in the book, but also she could see how she's leaned into the privilege and entitlement that she benefits from without ever acknowledging it. And I think she could learn that the world doesn't revolve around her by reading this book. But yeah, I do love Rory, but as I said, in the later seasons, especially when she gets with Logan, I feel like she's a completely different character, but you know, that's for a different time. Now on to Queen Lorelei. My queen, my ride or die. And the first book that I'm gonna suggest for Lorelei is Mother in the Dark by Kayla Maurir. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In some of my previous videos you might have seen that I absolutely adored that book, and it highlights the mother-daughter relationships and the toxic elements that can appear in those relationships when relationships between mothers and daughters aren't, you know, what is sold to us on a Hallmark card. It's more so the mothers who haven't sort of raised the daughters with a sense of compassion and comfort. They've more so raised them with a barrier, and obviously we know Lorelei has troubles with Emily. Who wouldn't?
And that's on periodic table, sis.
Period.
And I think it really highlights the fraught relationship dynamics that mothers and daughters can have, because they're very complex. And I don't blame Lorelei for having issues with Emily, because I'd certainly have issues with her if she was my mother as well.
She's got a point.
And the next book that I'm recommending for Lorelei is Maid by Stephanie Land. And if you're a fan of the show, you know that Lorelei, when she left home and moved to Stars Hollow, she became a maid and she worked her way up to become the manager of the hotel. And, you know, we stan a self-sufficient queen. We stan someone turning her back on the elitist privileged life that she didn't ever feel like she fit into. And who wouldn't run away from those conditions? I know some people on Reddit like to say, oh, Lorelei, you know, she had a lot of privilege and she just left it, which is very entitled. But it's like, if you lived in that environment and you were under such strict rules and expected to act a certain way, very old-fashioned, may I add, why would you put yourself in that environment? So yeah, Maid is about class, privilege and poverty, and it's a memoir about her struggles as a single mother, and she becomes a maid to try and make ends meet while she's also trying to raise a daughter. And you know, there's parallels there with Lorelei and Rory and the author, and I think Lorelei would definitely see herself in that novel. So I think, you know, that's perfect for our Queen Lorelei, and I won't have a bad word said about her, although in season 7 some of her behaviours are questionable. Next on to Emily, Miss Emily Gilmore. Emily, what a real complex character. But I have to say, I struggle to like her. She does have some iconic moments.
Young man, I don't know where that's been, but I can say with absolute certainty it won't be going anywhere near my mouth.
But she's just very entitled, rude, elitist. She's snobby, and there's just so much stacked up against her that I can't look the other way when she's sometimes funny. So, the first book for Emily is Toxic Parents by Craig Buck and Susan Forward, and I think the title explains it well. Let's be honest, Emily is a very toxic parent. I'd say bordering on abusive, emotionally abusive, very manipulative and cruel, and the way that she treats Lorelei is very vindictive, and there's not much like love and acceptance there. She just wants to try and mould Lorelei into like the perfect daughter, and then they have the do-over with Rory, and it's just really, it's very, she needs help, and I think she could get it by reading this book. And the next book I would suggest for Emily is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This was one that I read a few years ago and I really enjoyed it, and it explores the lives of 3 different women in different time periods, and it explores womanhood, identity and the pursuit of happiness. And I think Emily should really try and focus on finding her own path and passion, and I think sometimes that she has a disdain for Lorelei because she's so free and willing to seek her passions out, whereas we see moments where Emily doesn't like it, where she's considered just a wife, or she doesn't seem that she's lived a life for herself. And I think if she did, she wouldn't have such toxic ways about her, because she's kind of old-fashioned in the way she wants to live, and she expects her daughter to also live that way, and it's just like, honey, we're in modern times. world now. And because Emily's often so self-absorbed in her own little bubble of privilege, this could sort of push her out of that and maybe give her some perspective, because we do see flickers of her having an awareness, but you can't really go around expecting other people to conform to your ways. So yeah, Emily is a complex character, but she's very toxic. Then we've got the final Gilmore, Richard Gilmore. I can take him or leave him. I'm not someone who really cares about Richard.
I said what I said!
He just reeks of privileged male entitlement. You know, there's some moments where he stands up for Lorelei or Rory that I'm like, yeah, that's nice of you, but you know, I probably wouldn't have much of a conversation with him, because what would we talk about? So, the first one for Richard, Mr. Old Money, is The Broken Ladder by Keith Payne, and that explores the social, psychological and physical ramifications of inequality in America, and how the rich get richer and the poorest people feel the effects of everything. And I think the big issue with the class divide in Gilmore Girls is that the Gilmores and their people that they're familiar with and their environment, their world, they're very entitled, and the old money, and they think that they're entitled to behave or be a certain way, and they don't see anything wrong with taking the opportunities that are handed to them, and they would happily run in those circles of privilege forever, and they look down on Dean, Jess, Luke, even Stars Hollow, they look down on that, and the way Lorelei's happy just working at an inn or having her own business, unless you're out to get rich and become elitist. They just don't see you as being a real person. Yeah, I think Richard could learn a thing or two by holding up a mirror to his own privilege and elitist behaviours. And the next book that I'd recommend for Richard is, you know, it touches on those themes of race, privilege, class, elitism, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang, and anyone who knows me knows that I live for that book. And Babel has those themes that I think, you know, the historical truths of colonialism and Western society succeeding on the backs of other cultures and people, and its historical basis is in a lot of truth, but it's light fantasy as well. And I think, you know, you see Richard, he's very into history, and it's got a dark academia vibe, so I think that would be a good book for him to read, because it's kind of modern, but it's not too in the real world, but it has enough historical accuracy and truths for it to feel very familiar. And I think people like Richard, Emily and Logan, and even Rory, they really need to be constantly working on the fact that they have a lot handed to them, and they're already halfway up the ladder, so they need to really acknowledge all the things they've been given in life and be aware of them to be better people. Yes, that's my 2 cents. Now on to Rory's love interests. We've got, first of all, Jess. Team Jess. Sorry, I'm Team Jess. The rest are just trash. Into the trash. And the first book for Jess is Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. One I haven't read yet, but I think as Jess is a working class young man struggling with finding his place in the world and dealing with a lot of family issues and things about him not being able to express himself the way a lot of men feel like they can't express themselves because of toxic masculinity. I think Jess would enjoy reading about those themes, which is touched upon in Shuggy Bane. That's about a working class child growing up in poverty in Scotland, I believe, and he touches on neglect and things like that and toxic masculinity. But one thing I find interesting about Jess as well is, out of all of Rory's boyfriends, I know Dean does to some extent, but Jess really takes an interest in Rory's interests, and he reads what she suggests, and he's also the only bookish one really out of them. He matches Rory, they're more of an equal, which is why I also think he's the most suitable for Rory. I mean, I'm not going to deny there's certain behaviours I don't agree with, but I think there's an explanation for Jess's behaviour and how he is as a character, growing up with instability and lacking a safety net and strong role models, whereas Logan and Dean, they don't really have an excuse, they're just entitled. The next book for Jess I would recommend is Black Swans by Eve Babbitt. We see Jess reading a lot of beat poets and books about cultural figures who have gone their own way and kind of had a unique perspective and viewpoint of life. You know, he didn't really want to conform to society in a sense when he doesn't really like going to school, but he's still smart. He just doesn't want to be in those environments. And I think Eve Babbitt writes about that world of interesting characters and artists and musicians and people who don't want to conform to the expected ways of living. And I think he'd really enjoy those worlds and characters. And I don't think he's one to shrug his shoulders at a female author, whereas I feel like, you know, Dean probably would. So yeah, I'm Team Jess and I don't care what you say. Next we've got Dean, who he's all nice and fine at the beginning, small town boy, but his ways become very questionable later in the seasons. Hello Donna Reid episode. The first book for him is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, because, you know, careful what you wish for, Dean. I think he could learn a thing or two about wanting to have a traditional woman fulfilling her traditional roles and read that horror story of Handmaid's Tale and see if you still want that. Next we've got Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, and I picked this because the protagonist in that book is a family man in a small town in Ireland, and he has a lot of obstacles that he has to overcome in the short space of the book, and ultimately we see him doing the right thing for society and for the person he's helping. And I think, you know, Dean could read that and really realise that, you know, he could do the right thing because he seems very driven by his own selfish interests at times, and I also think he's got lots of red flag behaviours. The way he raises his voice with Rory, I'm not here for it, when he doesn't get his own way. Then we've got Logan. And I'm currently doing my usual rewatch, and there are moments where I feel like Logan is suitable for Rory, but I also think there's an element to him where he's good at interacting with people, but there's like a falseness to it because he's so used to getting his own way. And, you know, he's got a $3 million trust fund. Do you really think he's gonna know how to interact with Joe Bloggs down the street? No, but he has a superficial quality to him that I don't really like, and I think he's aware enough of his privilege to not throw it in people's face all the time, but he's aware of it enough that he uses it to his advantage, and I think he brings out the worst in Rory as well. You may not agree, but that's my opinion. I was going to suggest a book for Logan called Entitled, How Male Privilege Hurts Women, but then I thought, Rachel, you're being a bit harsh. I mean, he is very entitled, like the way he treats Marty, the way he also treats like service staff and things like that, the way he treated Jess. Red flag. Strike one. But I thought, Rachel, you're being a bit harsh. Plus, he's the only boyfriend of Rory's we see who doesn't take an interest in Rory's reading. I mean, we don't see her reading as much in the later seasons, but he doesn't seem to like take suggestions from her. He's more of a, I'll show you this wonderful life of privilege, and she goes along for the ride, but she kind of loses herself a little bit, which is, I know a lot of the fans agree that Rory kind of loses who she was as she gets older, and I think it's because she's putting her own interests on the back burner to have the door open to this world of privilege. Plus, I won't forgive him for saying in the argument that she didn't pay rent for his penthouse apartment when he invited her to live there. So the book I've picked for him, I found it a bit difficult to pick one for him, is Cast: The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, and that is about how throughout history America's racism has created a caste system between white people and black people, and just anyone who isn't white, you're in a caste system. And I think people like Logan, who are very entitled and privileged, $3 million trust fund, I just can't get over that, they really, I think, need to work on acknowledging the privilege and be exposed to how the real world works, because they're living in a privileged bubble for the majority of the time. They go from privileged prep school to privileged college to privileged jobs, and they're not living in the reality of how people really have to live their lives. They don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so there's aspects of Logan where I'm like, he does treat Rory well, but he probably knows how to treat anyone well because he's got money. He doesn't apologise for his privilege, which, you know, he doesn't really need to, but I feel like he also doesn't acknowledge it either. And whenever Rory brings it up, he tries to deflect and say that she's just as privileged, and in some senses she is, but she can lean on the fact that, you know, she was raised in a small town by a mother, whereas he was raised in a world of elite privilege. Next we have Luke. And obviously I find him a bit difficult to pick for, but we do have a kind of a running joke in the show with Luke and his self-help books. So the first book that I'm recommending is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Klonk. I hope I pronounced that right.
Thanks a lot, you idiot. Thanks a lot, Rachel. Thanks a lot.
And, you know, we've heard and we've seen Luke with the self-help books, and this one is about how trauma and traumatic experiences can impact our physical body, and it seems like something Luke would seek out to read or listen to. Plus, he's very cut off emotionally and then is very rage-filled, so, you know, maybe he'd learn something about that. And the next book that I'd suggest is the ultimate Pinan novel, The Light Being Left On for One True Love, and that is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, because we know Luke's been pining for Lorelei since the beginning of Gilmore Girls, and he's had that light shining only for Lorelei for all the seasons. And I think Luke and Lorelei are very much Jay Gatsby and Daisy. Then we've got Paris, who I hated at the beginning, but, you know, I stand now. And the book that I pick for Paris is Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. Spoiler alert. Remember when Paris has the affair with the professor who's about 40 years older than her. Vladimir is about gender dynamics and inappropriate relationships set in a small university in America. And it highlights how women often pay for men's wrongs, even when they're not the one responsible for it. I always sense there's a simmering rage in Paris, and I think she would really gel with that book. Then I've also picked out Night Bitch for Paris because, especially in the year in the life, she's still got that simmering rage, and I could just imagine her to go balls to the wall and just become animalistic and get a kick out of this book. It's unhinged, and we know Paris is a bit of an unhinged one. Then we've got Lane. Justice for Lane. The way they wrote Lane in the later seasons and in the year in the life, justice for Lane Kim. Also, I feel the need to say, whilst I'm doing my rewatch, that I think Rory is a terrible friend to Lane. She never prioritises her. She only ever bothers with Lane when she can bother to show up to Stars Hollow. She's just very selfish, and I'm just like, Lane has the right to simply say to Rory, you're a bad friend. So the first book for Lane is Girl in a Band by Kim Gordon, and that is a memoir by Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth, and she was the female lead of the band. And we know Lane is a music lover. She's the only female in her band, and we know that she loves Sonic Youth and, you know, a lot of female rock stars. Alright, Avril Lavigne.
It's Avril Lavigne's world and we're just living in it.
But I just think she'd devour this, and she'd see a lot of her own experiences being a woman in music, and especially in that environment that's very hetero. So yeah, that's the first book for Lane. Then we've got Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zauner. Is it Zauner? And that's another memoir by a woman who's in a band. It's Michelle Zauner, who fronts Japanese Breakfast, and she also shares her experience of being a Korean American in a mostly white town and white school, and I think Lane could really identify with that, as from what I see, they're the only Asian family in Stars Hollow. We don't have much racial diversity in Stars Hollow, let's be honest. It's very white. She talks a lot about the loss of a mother in the book, and she reflects on her Korean heritage and how she connected with her mother through food. We see the clash of cultures with Lane and her mum, and I think she'd really see herself in this book. So that one's for Lane, and also for anyone who wants to read it, because it's a beautiful book. And finally, we've got Suki. And the first book for Suki is Moshi Moshi by Banana Yoshimoto, and that one is about family and loss, but it's also very much about how we find comfort in things, and she describes a lot of food and meals in the book that is very mouth-watering. But also it's about how people can show their love language through food or get comfort through it. And I think Suki is someone who shows a love language through acts of service and, you know, giving people food and things like that. And plus Melissa McCarthy is an icon. The other book I got for Suki is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manasala, and that one's more of like a light-hearted rom-com style book that's set in a family restaurant, but it's got a bit more of a sinister edge, and I always feel like Suki's got a bit of a sharpness to her, which I love. And it's about someone trying to come and help the family restaurant and save it, whilst also having to deal with relationship issues and family issues. And I just think, you know, our food lover Suki would be all over that. So they're all the main ones, and there were a few other secondary characters I was aware of, like we've got the town people, but they're not that important, they don't stand out to me. But I will also recommend Michelle because she's an icon. His book choice is the Britney Spears memoir, obviously, because she's into iconic pop culture, strong females. We know his love for Celine Dion, and I think he would be first in line to buy that Britney memoir. Tell me I'm wrong, I'll wait. So yeah, that was my book suggestions, my Gilmore Girls centric book suggestions. Obviously this is just a little bit of fun. If you love Gilmore Girls, let me know any of your thoughts on the characters, who's your favourite, what team are you on, if you think the book suggestions are a good choice or what you'd give them. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe, like, comment and subscribe. Join us. I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!